The first Persona game, released under the name Shin Megami Tensei Persona and Persona Revelations, came out in 1996 for the PlayStation from the developer Atlus. Nowadays, the Persona series is a well-known line of JRPGs, even if you're like me and have never played any of them. Until I played and streamed the game a few weeks ago, of course. I've been a fan of JRPGs for decades, so why hadn't I ever touched a Persona game? The first game wasn't released in Europe back in the 90s, so I couldn't play it. Since Persona 3 was the first in the series to get released on the continent, and I didn't want to start the series in the middle, I never touched any Persona games until now. Persona is a spin-off of the occult horror Shin Megami Tensei RPG series. Like its sire, unlike most RPGs that take place in fantasy worlds or in futuristic sci-fi settings, Persona is set in modern day with a bunch of demons and magic thrown in. With the basic info out of the way, the two relevant questions are: did I miss out on something being deprived of the game in my teen years? And is Persona 1 worth playing today? The answers are sort of and not particularly. I probably would have enjoyed the unique take on JRPGs as a teenager, so that counts as missing out. However, playing it now after nearly 30 years, it's certainly no classic. For the most part, Persona 1 is fine. The story didn't sweep me along, nor did the gameplay, but it wasn't terrible. While there were some aggravating sections, I didn't end up hating the game overall. Still, having experienced the game, I don't feel particularly enriched. Although it'd be wrong to dismiss a game as worthless where a bunch of high school students wield firearms and enslave demons to save the world, or the town of Mikagecho. You move through dungeons in 3D grid movement like in Dungeon Master, Wizardry, or Eye of the Beholder, although the battles are in standard JRPG fashion when a random encounter is triggered, transporting the party to a separate turn-based battle screen. What separates Persona 1 from the rest is that the dungeons often aren't your run-of-the-mill caves and dungeons, but schools, science facilities, and forest mazes. Graphically, this is fairly nice and refreshing. Unfortunately though, I probably spent more time looking at the small minimap in the corner of the screen than the actual first-person view, as the minimap yields more tactical information. Unlike mouse-controlled dungeon crawlers, you cannot interact with anything while in the dungeon view of Persona. There are no items to pick up or secret doors to find, or at least I found none. There are a couple of places where you have to activate switches though, but that's as far as it goes. At times, as you enter a room or a building, the game switches to an isometric view more typical of JRPGs of the era. In this mode you can talk to NPCs or your other party members. Occasionally you can even loot chests or open booby-trapped ones. The combat differs from the traditional turn-based JRPGs in a few ways. First of all, the combat arena uses a grid-based system. Depending on the position of each character and the attack he uses, you can only target enemies in certain parts of the arena. You can move characters during a fight or alter the formation, but it takes the character's entire turn and is simply a pain in the ass to do so. The worst part is that if you change formation during a fight to move your guy to be able to hit an enemy sitting in the corner, the game saves the new position in your settings. So after the fight, if you want the guy to be in the regular position again, you have to go to the menu to move him back where he should be. Not the worst affront in the history of gaming, but tedious nonetheless. The types of attacks your party can dish out are varied. There are your run-of-the-mill melee weapons like swords, knives, mops, and axes, but each high school student is also equipped with a gun. On top of that, the party members possess a persona, or perhaps they are possessed by one, which allows them to use magic based on the individual persona they are using. The routine in combat consists of figuring out the strengths and weaknesses of each enemy and exploiting them. Some may be weak to regular RPG elements such as fire or wind, to more unusual elements like force or nuclear, even just swords in particular, or guns in general. Others are immune to certain types of damage, even absorb and convert it to HP or deflect it back at you. Outside of old-fashioned ass-kicking or running away, Persona 1 has a third way of dealing with enemy encounters. You can talk with the demons roaming the land. The player can win their favor to gain items, experience, or a persona card, or anger them, making the battle more difficult. I wonder whether the dialogue wheel of Oblivion was inspired by this system. The main purpose of this function is the acquisition of persona or spell cards, and I will address that a bit later on. But if you manage to win the favor of an enemy, they will also leave the battle. Although you tend to miss out on experience points when doing so, it can be a viable strategy against a particularly tough batch of enemies. The difficulty in Persona 1 isn't particularly high though, for the most part. The battles feel a bit random, as some turns the enemies deal 3 or 20 damage to your characters, and the next they do more than 100 or occasionally one-shot a party member. Still, despite the sudden setbacks, death did not come often in the game. There were two parts in the game that I found particularly challenging that stood out from the middling difficulty of most of Persona 1, and not in a good way. This game is in Dark Souls, and I had gotten used to the fact that I don't have to get good, but then suddenly there was a dungeon where only two characters could enter instead of the normal five, and the difficulty ramped up significantly. The adversity didn't even come from having to deal with the same number of enemies with only two characters. No, it was the status effects. Plenty of enemies in that dungeon seemed to be capable of applying negative status effects. If one character got frozen or petrified, rendering them incapable of movement, you can imagine it was difficult not to die. The second hard part was the final boss with a seemingly endless pool of hit points. I'll get to that later. The combat system deserves credit for trying something different, positioning despite the end result not turning out to be anything groundbreaking that ended up becoming the industry standard in JRPGs. Unfortunately, combat isn't particularly exciting either, but it's certainly not bad. Overall, I'd call it unique yet mediocre. There are also a few gambling minigames that I wasted a few hours on thanks to the marvels of emulator saves coming. Making a profit without the help of an emulator, however, sounds like a unique kind of hell. What is a persona? The thing the series gets its name from anyways. It's a manifestation of a character's psyche and also some sort of supernatural entity that gives them an access to magic. Each persona is tied to a major arcana of the tarot that somehow represents its power and abilities. It's probably something very profound, but I never managed to figure out the significance of the tarot stuff. Even after finishing the game, the concept of persona wasn't really clear to me. Personas occupy a hazy area somewhere between the psychological and supernatural, mostly leaning on the latter. Persona 1 does not spend too much time dwelling on the nature of the various individual personas the main characters can employ. The strongest significance is that of a game mechanic allowing characters in a modern setting to use conventional RPG abilities, i.e., magic and other special abilities. Deriving from what you actually see in the game, it's hard not to come to the conclusion that personas have a demonic origin. The various enemies you battle in Persona 1 are demons, and you gain new personas by combining two spell cards you receive from demons after convincing them to give them to you. These cards seem to contain the essence of the type of demon that has given it to you. So the simple formula is demon A plus demon B equals persona. Perhaps we have to interpret this to mean that ultimately demons are just creations of the human psyche. Or the human psyche is just a product of demonic meddling. Fusing these cards is done at the Velvet Room, tended by a long-nosed midget and symbolized by a six-pointed star. I wonder what they meant by this. The location lends its look from the Black Lodge in Twin Peaks, except the dominant color is blue instead of red. The name Velvet Room probably comes from Lynch's movie Blue Velvet, along with the color blue. There's not that much to say about the characters, as they're not particularly exciting or even hilariously badly written. The main character has to be named by the player. He's basically a silent protagonist throughout the rest of the game, who only speaks in a few occasions we get to choose between two dialogue options. The protagonist is basically just a basic avatar for the player with no actual personality of his own. Occasionally, the other high school students talk in a manner suggesting they respect the main character and his opinions, but actually, it felt like the character exists only for combat purposes and a few instances of quote unquote moral dilemmas. The maximum number of party members is five. In addition to the protagonist, three of them are decided to be with you throughout most of the game. The only choice is with the fifth character. Nanjo Gei is an arrogant and condescending rich kid from a Zaibatsu family. He takes the rational, emotionless approach to most situations. I would call him the best character among the party members, not necessarily due to being likable, but because he is a fairly believable and well rounded character. The others are sort of all over the place. Inaba Masao, nicknamed Mark, is a contrast to Nancho that he tends to make decisions emotionally. He's sort of an annoying teenager, yet bearable. My description of him is vague since I didn't actually get a good idea of who he is and what makes him tick outside of some superficial elements. Sonomura Maki is the chick in the party. She plays an important part in the overall story, but in terms of personality, I can't really think of anything beyond that she's the chick. The fifth party member is chosen from among four different characters. Once you accept one of them, they've set in for the rest of the playthrough and cannot be changed. I went with the first one offered, Uesugi Hidehiko, since I didn't know the terms and conditions. The game did ask ominously whether I was sure I wanted to add the character to my party. That did seem to imply something, yet it wasn't clear what. Uesugi Hidehiko, nicknamed Brown, who literally received the name because he once shit his pants, is a guy with a bad self esteem, although he overcompensates by acting like he's the coolest and toughest guy in the world. The problem is, the writing lacks subtlety and the character comes off as one dimensional. The three other characters still appear as NPCs, but as they weren't members in my epic party, I don't know much about their personalities. Kirishima Eriko seems to be into the occult, and Ayase Yuka is a girl that might be described in modern parlance as a thought. Kido Reiji is a tough guy, transfer student. Then there's Mayuzumi Yukino, a character I completely forgot about because she's available as a permanent party member only in an alternative route in the game. The way to recruit the characters is that when Hidehiko is offered as a party member, and if you reject him, later in the game Eriko or Yuka will be offered. Recruiting Reiji, however, seems to be a complex process with jumping through a lot of different kinds of hoops. In addition to the party members, there are a bunch of NPCs in the form of people from their school and the town of Mikage-cho. Generally speaking, the characters in Persona 1 aren't that exciting, yet not necessarily unusually uninteresting in the grand scheme of JRPGs. Although, since the setting is modern day, writing appropriate and interesting characters might be a tougher task than in more traditional fantasy settings where a character's personality can lean heavily on tropes derived from their class or background. Visually, the characters aren't that appealing either due to their graphical style. It differs from your conventional anime style, and some might say to its benefit, not me though, as the style reminds me of that guy in your high school who could draw. It means it looks better than the handiwork of your average high school kid, but still doesn't measure up to the big leagues. It's not terrible, just uninteresting. The game starts off with the famous quote from Chuang Tzu about a dreaming butterfly. Then we see a bunch of high school students in an empty classroom talking about persona. They enact a kind of summoning ritual for persona reminiscent of horror movies like Candyman. Although some of them are skeptical anything will happen. Afterwards, a little girl's translucent form manifests in the room. A sudden storm appears, and we are treated to a cutscene with a butterfly and a mysterious man wearing a mask. When the gameplay finally starts, we get to explore the school and talk to NPCs. The starting party consists of four characters, about half of the kids involved in the ritual, one of whom is the main character. Eventually, the party leaves the school to visit a classmate of theirs, Maki, lying in hospital. After meeting her, all hell breaks loose, almost literally, as there's an earthquake and zombies attack. From now on, demons are roaming the streets of the city. Then the party visits a shrine to get another audience with a masked dude named Philemon. Afterwards, you bust out a couple of your friends we saw in the beginning of the game from jail. Then we learn about the evil Seibek Corporation run by Kandori Takahisa, which is your basic evil science corporation. He's developed a diva system that allows one to enter an alternative dimension. The party battles through demons in the dungeon that is the Seibek building and ends up in the other dimension. There's a weird and evil little girl dressed in black who calls Kandori her father, a scientist who is not happy with what Seibek had created, the usual stuff. An alternative route exists in the game where instead of battling Kandori and the Seibek Corporation, you fight against the Snow Queen. That's, however, where my expertise on the matter ends, as I didn't experience this route. Some versions of the game lack this route. The other dimension is almost a mirror image of Mikage-cho, where our heroes are from, although there are obvious differences. The police station in real world has become a forest in the other one, a rich character has become poor and vice versa, whereas Maki has a mother in the real world, she lacks one in the alternative dimension. And best of all, you can buy firearms at a convenience store. A while after arriving in the parallel reality, the party gets stuck in a shopping arcade, since a capricious queen with a magic mirror won't let them leave. Naturally, you have to beat her up. When you meet her, though, you find out she's someone the characters know, a friend of Maki's. More dungeons and a bit of story exposition later, you find another little girl. This one is dressed in white and good, unlike her dark counterpart. She also, curiously, resembles Maki quite a lot. You gather some magical MacGuffins, and eventually it's revealed that the little girl is Maki. Actually, both of them are. Maki is split into several personalities, and the alternative dimension is somehow an idealized version of the real world that only exists in her mind. Since the real Maki is stuck in a hospital bed, and somehow with the aid of Seibek's Diva system, the figments of her mind were rendered into reality. Or something. I don't think the alternative dimension is simply a dream, since you can buy guns there and use them in the real world. To be honest, I'm not certain how exactly this all works, and I'm probably too low IQ to ever be able to do so. You go back to the real world after Maki's mom, who is a Sabek employee, somehow ends up in the alt world and helps keep the door open. You go through another dungeon to reach Kandori and kick his ass. He dies, but it's revealed that he had been possessed by his persona all along. He wasn't the ultimate evil after all. Afterwards, the protagonist and Maki have to go through the annoying dungeon by just the two of them. After rejoining with the rest of the party, you head to the final dungeon and ultimately the final boss, which is Pandora. It's not Maki's persona, but the manifestation of her suppressed emotions and the culmination of the darkest aspects of her subconscious. Or something. In actuality, it's a kind of a double phallus monstrosity that looks like a reject from a gay version of Silent Hill. After defeating that, you face against the final form of Pandora, a butterfly. The final boss seemed to have way too many hit points and took an eternity to beat. I had to resort to saves coming since I didn't want to give up and retreat to level up my characters and make sure they had equipped all the personas most suitable against this boss. It got the job done, but it was painful. I did not have fun with this boss. Persona 1 isn't a bad game, but looking back on it, I can't really think of anything about the game I truly liked, something that I found cool outside of the general feeling and the setting. The dungeon that allowed only two characters and the final boss made me hate the game, yet beyond that, it wasn't terrible either. I guess the music, which is kind of a weird J pop that plays even during battles, was kinda intriguing. The story too was nonsensical, which one might say is standard for this kind of anime adjacent media. It wasn't atrocious, but left me lukewarm. A teenage version of me would probably have liked the game more, but the middle aged me found it quite mediocre in most aspects. Persona 1 only truly stands out in the game archaeological sense, as it is the first installment in a fairly prestigious line of games. Beyond its cultural significance, I would not recommend this game to anyone, although certainly there are worse searches out there for RPG archaeologists. Wait, cogito ergo son?